This is Karen with NewClevelandRadio.net, and today I have on Christy Horner, who is the founder of Courage to Caregivers. And as many of you know, I have been very interested in caregiving for a very long time, and especially after being a caregiver for my mother when she was in her last leg of life. And Christy, I'm so honored to have you on here. I know that you work with many people to encourage them to find self-care as well as caring for others. So welcome to the show.
Thank you. Thank you, Karen. Thanks for having me.
Oh, absolutely. So how did Courage to Caregivers come about?
Well, it's a little bit of a long story in the sense that I, too, was an active caregiver for my brother. He, in about 2010, called me just on a regular spring day and saw that it was him calling from out of town, and he really just got right to the point. He wanted to end his life, and at that moment, you pull over the car, I text my husband, get me on the next flight to his town, and I just started talking. And I knew enough at that time to ask some really hard questions. The first one being, do you have a plan? And he said yes. And then I asked if he had the means to execute on that plan, and he did not. So that gave me a sense of kind of where he was in his suicide ideation at the time. And as we continued to talk on the phone, he said, just hearing your voice, knowing you can be here in a few hours, I think I'm going to be okay. And can you come and help me? And so I did. And what followed were 4 years as one of his primary mental health caregivers. And ultimately he did lose his life to suicide, or sometimes we say he lost his life to mental illness on May 30th in 2014. And really, Karen, at that moment, you, in that deep grief, as it sounds like you've had that, most people, probably every one of your listeners has had experience caring for someone that they love, no matter what the story, and experienced really traumatic, really deep grief. For us, it was very traumatic grief. It set us on a course of healing and really looking for hope again. And we had learned a lot in those 4 years, my two sisters and I, about how to provide care to someone we love, living with some brain differences. And we thought, we need to help other people. We have so many friends who are facing the same story, and no one should feel alone like we did during that time. So that's where the idea started, and we've just kept at it ever since.
Well, and I think all of us at some time in our life, we make the comment, I wish I were dead. I wish I was never born.
Right.
Because there's always something that happens somewhere along that path of life that you start to question, can I make it another minute? Can I make it another day? And most of us, we can. We know it's idle talk. We're either feeling a little sorry for ourselves, or there's something that really is going on that we need to fight through.
Right.
The hard part for most of us is when a loved one says those words like your brother did, to start to know, is it real? Is it attention? And why is this person who probably looks like they've got everything in life wanting to end their life? So
I have a lot to say about that, actually.
I'm sure.
And I know that really wasn't a question, but what we've come to realize in all this because of course when you lose someone traumatically, you want to understand why.
Right.
And what we've come to realize is that not one person wants to end their life.
Right.
What they want is to end the pain. And that could be a senior who's just tired, right? Or they're hooked up to machines, or they've had a life of chronic pain, or they're living with a slow degenerative disease with no cure. they want to end the pain. And so that's what we've come to understand, and no matter what we could have done, we could not free him from that pain.
Exactly. And I'm glad that you pointed it out that way, because as parents, as spouses, as brothers and sisters, we think that we know each other well enough that we should just be able to put a Band-Aid on it and make it all better. I have my youngest son is on the autism spectrum, and most people would have no idea, talking to him, knowing him, other than the fact that, he'll tell you. And he tells you on purpose, because he says if he messes up, if he says the wrong word, if he touches you or doesn't touch you, he wants you to understand that he just thinks a little differently. And when he was growing up, I can't tell you how many times, he would just break down and say, I just don't want to live. And luckily, we knew the right questions to ask, too.
Good.
Do you have a plan? Do you know how to execute it? And we never asked him why. We never told him not to be sad. In fact, many times I said, you have every reason to feel sad. You have every reason to feel depressed, but is there anything that you really like in life, And usually that opened up his eyes. He'd go, well, yeah. As a little kid, it was always ice cream, and then it became, his sports teams. And so he now, as a 28-year-old, is very groomed into, when he gets in those downward spirals, to pull himself out by saying, wait a second, what is it that I do like? And I have, gotten calls sometimes when he's at work, and he'll say, can you please go out and get some Ben & Jerry's? And I know exactly what he's telling me. He's having a rough time at work, and he's having those, terrible, black thoughts. So,
isn't that great, though, that he still sees you as very much a partner in this, and that he recognizes his own, not only trigger, if you will, but also the solution.
Absolutely.
And has included you in that plan.
Yes.
I love that.
And
I love that, Karen.
And I think it's important that we understand that no matter where we are in life, we need to find that somebody, and it could be a group of somebodies that you're going to go to. When your brother called you that day, were you the closest sibling to him? Is that why he picked you?
You know what? I have thought about that many times. To be honest, I'm not quite sure how I got chosen. To be quite honest, I was the oldest and he was the youngest. Okay. And we had a 9-year spread between the two of us. And the four of us, as all kids growing up, right, really, these two get along, these two get along. Just being the oldest, we were the three oldest girls. We were all 2 years apart. We're all very close now. We kind of morphed in and out because we were so close in age. Really, the youngest two were quite close. I think that it was just really, at that moment in our season of life, capacity, and maybe just kind of the luck of, he knew I would listen. And so I do think that I always take a call like that very seriously. Like you had said in the beginning, is this a cry for help? Is this someone looking for attention? That may be the case in some cases, but I take every single suicide ideation very, very seriously, as if it could happen at that moment. Absolutely. And so I think that he knew he would get a listening ear. I think he knew that I had the most availability to jump on a plane and get out there. My sisters had smaller kids who were in school with active schedules. It just was the right moment. And so I felt very honored, and it was certainly a privilege. My next sister came out the next day and joined me, and we really divided the jobs. I was working with my brother one-on-one to create a care plan, and she was there to work with his then wife and small children to kind of do some healing for them. So we really divided and conquered the family so that we could kind of get the wheels back on in the direction of care.
How interesting. So did you have any training or background that got you, into this mode, knowing what to do for him?
So that's a great question. I at that moment, I am still a trained Stephen minister in our congregation. And so Stephen ministry was created by a pastor who recognized that with a huge congregation, you had a hard time meeting all the needs of those congregants as a pastor.
Sure.
And he thought there are some scenarios, not all, where I could train my lay people to minister to each other. And so he created this beautiful caring program that provides one-on-one caring ministry within the congregation. And they now are in many, many congregations across the globe. And I was very fortunate to have just finished my training as a Stephen minister. I actually had one-on-one caring experience with another congregant to provide that care. So through that training, we were given training on suicide ideation, mental health challenges, what to look for, red flags, how to respond, and how to provide that caring support. A Stephen minister does not provide counseling. A Stephen minister does not provide solutions. We're actually just there to listen. So my daughter would have told you, she was in high school at the time, she would have told you I did nothing but was trained to be a listener. She goes, "Are you going to that listening training again?" It was kind of funny. And I thought, well, yes. And so I felt very well equipped to be a good listener and not solve someone else's problems, really work with them to empower them. And that's probably the hardest part, because we all have an idea of what might fix someone else,
right,
but that's not necessarily going to be helpful.
Well, and, it's interesting because when I got the call that my mother was ill, I had always believed for probably most of my life that my mother and I had a love-hate relationship. Loved her to death, but you know what?
Right.
I always felt that, my hair wasn't right. I wasn't wearing the right thing. And those were my insecurities, which I learned at the time that she was ill. But when I got that call, I knew what I needed to do. And
of course.
My whole personality changed. It wasn't, I didn't care about the past. I just cared about the now, to be there for her, to not judge what she was going through and not let anybody else judge what she was going through. And it so happened that I was the holder of her living will. And and I'm the youngest. Now, my one brother, had the financial responsibility, and my other brother was given no responsibility, which he was glad for, because he kept saying, he couldn't help financially, and spiritually he wasn't there either. But he would be there for the two of us if we needed anything. And so here we were, with my mom, and, I'm thinking to myself, I'm the holder of her living will, and I know that she's on a downward spiral. And talking to the doctors, I just said, we've got to honor what she wants. And as I said that, it was like, this big pain that was sitting on my shoulders. Once I said it, I realized I was giving her the best gift I could ever give her, just to be there with her. And that's what I hear you saying, that, you provided for your brother, is that it wasn't judging him and saying, well, why do you feel that way? Or you shouldn't feel that way. You allowed him to be who he was, hopefully giving him the strength, which obviously he found 4 more years of strength. But, we all have that inner voice. And I read that in your blog today about that inner voice that nags at us. And we all think we're the only ones who have that voice. But it's not true. We all have it.
Oh, we all do. Yeah. Absolutely.
So what?
Absolutely. And
So in your training, what do you learn about how to really listen to people?
That is a great question. And so, and that's not always easy, right? I mean,
Right.
I make it sound easy when you're interviewing me. You recap and just say, and it sounds like it was so beautiful. You know, there were ups and downs to that active caregiving, as I'm sure it was for you, right?
Right.
We did our best, the very best we could at that moment, and I did everything I could at that moment. I think that when there are giant mood swings involved, and as it sounds like you've had experience with that as well, that it's hard to kind of keep your composure. And so I think in my training up to that point in active listening is really understanding the difference between being there, being present and listening, and really active listening, because that's the difference, and that's what is the really hard part. You know, we all make jokes about, you know, our husbands or partners, and they're like, "What did you say?" They're like, "Oh, I was listening, but I didn't catch half of what you said," right? And so it's just really, I had to literally, I would see that it was he who was calling, and I literally had to put everything aside. And I would go into a separate room, and I still know the place and how I went, and I usually brought a cup of tea or coffee with me because I knew I had to, like, buckle down. It was going to be a couple hours when he called. And in the beginning, I don't think I was trying to fix necessarily, but I always had, like, a thought and not a solution necessarily, but I would usually throw some little nugget. Well, like, maybe had you considered this, or maybe that person thought this. And he kind of put me in my place. He really helped me create better boundaries, to be honest, where he's like, "I don't need your opinion. I just need you to be there and listen." And I'm like, okay, right? So then I just stopped talking altogether, really just intently listen. And occasionally he would throw a, "What did you think? Was that okay?" He ultimately became a single parent fairly quickly, or co-parented with his then ex-wife. And in those single parent days, he was doing a lot more active parenting than he ever had. And so a lot of our conversations turned to his decision-making in his parenting, which was so interesting. So, you know, he would kind of not ask for an opinion, but just wanted he wanted affirmation, really, about how he was doing as a parent. And so some very just long conversations of me quite literally just shutting up and being fully present for him. And that's really what he needed. And quite honestly, again, helped me have really good boundaries, because that is also really critical to being a caregiver, is having those really good boundaries.
So we all need to learn to listen, not learn to respond. And
exactly.
I think that's what so many of us do. I used to find that, especially with my mother. And again, you know, when my mother passed away almost 3 years ago, she was 96 and a half. So, you know, she had lived through a totally different, you know, time period. And that's when mothers fixed everything. They put a Band-Aid on everything. And I remember when I was going through a deep depression, I told my husband that I wanted to go visit her. She lived up in Michigan. I said, "I've got to go see her, and I have to explain to her what I'm going through." And, and we went up there, and the first thing she says to my husband is, "I don't understand why Karen's depressed." And my husband said, "You don't have to understand it. She wants you to see it. She wants you to see she's trying to work through it, but she can't take your phone calls all the time." You know, and he went through this whole list of things that he and I had discussed, and I just wasn't strong enough to explain to her. And it took her almost 2 years, when I was really out of that depression, for her to say to me, "I'm here to listen." And I thought, wow, you know, I didn't ever expect her to say that to me. But when she did, I thought, you know, I am very, very lucky, because up until then, you know, if I would have said, I'm depressed because I stubbed my toe. It'd be like, well, why did you stub your toe? Well, I don't know why I stubbed it. I just did. And so she taught me so much towards the end. And when I was reading about you and all the things that you do, how difficult is it for you? Because I know you have kids. When you are amongst your congregants and there are so many kids today who are taking their lives, they just feel so unhappy with life. What can we do, or can we do anything to turn this around?
It's so interesting that you say that, because we just are coming off of our family fundraisers for two other nonprofit organizations pretty much from the moment we lost our brother, that are aimed at suicide prevention. And because we felt like we had to immediately put our energy and our resources behind those. And so one is called Life Act, and it's a local nonprofit. It's actually has outreach throughout the whole state of Ohio, and they work with middle and high school students to bring awareness around depression. They take trained facilitators, professionals, into the classrooms, and they train the kids on how red flags to look for in their friends or themselves and how to ask for help. And then they work towards suicide prevention, of course. And so we just had that walk on Sunday, and it has ignited quite a conversation. What makes suicide preventable? Here we've been trying to make sense of that for the last 5 years, and suicide has become epidemic. It continues to grow. It is growing among adolescents faster than any other segment. I do believe that the Life Act program was around when my brother was an adolescent. We would have caught his depression much, much sooner. It took 30 years for us to realize how sad he was, and his was really trauma-induced, is the way we have come to understand it. I think that for me, it's just an impetus to work harder, that we have work to do. And the work I do in supporting the caregivers to those kids, in some cases that have had suicide ideation, and in some cases they are spouses, in some cases they are parents. We've talked to many, many people of all different ages in our work. We're supporting the caregiver because we believe they need to be equipped with all the right resources, and there's a lot of great resources out there to educate yourself around what does mental illness, what does a brain difference look like, and education is power. Once you really understand that and you realize you do have some power in this, meaning the more we talk about it, that is what makes suicide preventable. By not talking about it, we're leaving that person to feel very alone in their challenge, no matter what the challenge is. And not all suicide comes from a place of mental illness. Some of it comes from it's an impulsive act, or it is an immediate response to something going on, whether it's a bullying or a rape or something else traumatic. Again, it goes back to that pain. And so when we notice something, we should always talk about it. And it's that talking about it that continues to make it preventable. Now, will we save every single person? I don't believe that we have the power to do that. I believe that life's challenges will continue to get in the way. There will continue to be pain in the world. I'm hoping that we can help all people, all ages, find other solutions to their pain than ending their life. But it's complicated. It involves acceptance. It involves talk therapy. It might include a potential medication,
right,
or not. My brother chose not to, and we had to be okay with that. So then it involves who's your support network. How are you going to work to make some significant changes? And this is hard work. It's hard work for the loved one who's experiencing the pain, and it's really hard work for the caregiver who's providing the support to that person. So all of this is hard, and it's just acknowledging that life is hard, this is hard, and we've been through hard things before. We can do this together. And that has been my approach, is to really build a community, and to build a community where it's safe to talk about this. Because really, I think the one thing we haven't talked about yet is the stigma around mental illness.
Right.
And it could be, in your case, autism, and in some cases, dementia. We can talk about cancer with our friends very easily. And when we talk about the fact that we are recently diagnosed with cancer, most people know how to respond. And they probably set up a sign-up Genius, and the next thing you know, you have casseroles arriving every Friday, and they're there to support you. They're giving you rides to the hospital for your treatments, and they're there with you through that cancer journey. And it's become very mainstream and acceptable to talk about cancer. And I hope we can cure cancer, but it probably won't happen in my lifetime. And so it's going to be an ongoing thing. Mental illness is very much the same way. It is very much a physical illness. It takes over your entire body. And yet we are paralyzed as a society to even talk about it. People are afraid to lose their jobs, so they won't talk about it.
Right.
They don't want to talk about it about their children or their families because they feel like they will be discriminated against and stigmatized. And so the fear of this getting out, your story getting out, is very, very real. I have the privilege of telling my story because that stigma is not there. I'm protective of my brother's family, and yet I'm able to talk about my journey as a caregiver 100% because he's not here. So there's no fear around that anymore. And my hope is that every time I tell my story, I'm able to give hope to someone else that they can share their story too, and that this is a safe place, and that they will always have someone there to listen, to realize they are not alone, and that it's going to take all of us to get through this.
And that's what empowerment is all about. When I started going through my depression, which I realized I had been depressed on and off my whole life, but not to the point that I was as an adult. When I started talking about it, I had some people in my life who said, why do you have to talk about it all the time? I said, it's not that I talk about it all the time, but I need to talk about it so I don't go back to that place. I need to keep moving forward. And for me to move forward was for me to explain what I had been through and what was hurting so much, because I could figure out what was hurting. And not everybody is that lucky. Not everybody can identify this is really what is causing me pain. But when I could identify that, I said, if I can help one person, I said, and if that person happens to be one of my children or my husband, I've come a long way. And as I started talking, I found out through family history that bipolar ran in the family. And it was like, wow. And now I had family members talking to me saying, I'm so glad you're talking, because guess what? I go through this all the time. But my mother told me to go into my bedroom and hide. And it was like, yeah, we were told not to hang our so-called dirty laundry outside. But sometimes you have to hang it out so that you can get it cleaned. And when I see a nonprofit group like yours, who is, you're out there and you're available to hear the stories and share the stories, it gives us a better hope for the future, not only just for our children, but like you said, for adults as well, who sometimes are on the brink of, you know what, my life must be over. I'm 60, 70, 80 years old and I don't want to hurt anymore. Well, you never know what cure is going to come about tomorrow either.
Exactly. And, I think they also think often when you get to that just deep despair and wanting the pain to end, I think you also think, and we heard this from our brother, that no, he didn't want to be around himself. So why would anyone else want to be around him? That he really felt we were all better off without him, that he was bringing his family and us down. And, of course, we know that's not true, but that kind of goes back to today's blog that we wrote about, which is those voices in your head and the negative self-talk that we're so good at telling ourselves that we're not worthy. And yet, in reality, we need to be our own best cheerleader and cheering ourselves on to say, I am worthy. I do matter. This is important. I am loved. And really and it's hard work to quiet those negative voices in our heads and bring out the positive ones. It's not easy. I get it. But, and if we feel like we can't do it ourselves, then we need to phone a friend or text a friend or email a friend to help us to reclaim that positive self-talk again.
So how can people find your organization?
And that's great. So we have a website, and it's www.courage2caregivers.org. And we also, on there, you can sign up to receive our weekly inspirational email. And it's really nothing more than just a little gift there's really no ask there. There are calls to action where we are working with people to help them really teach life skills is what our programming does.
Sure.
And that weekly email is based on the theme of the week in our programs. Also on our website is a sign up to our in-person as well as our peer support program. So we have 3 pilot programs. One can be virtual or in-person in Northeast Ohio, where we provide one-to-one caregiver support. We believe that we're the first ones to do that, where we match 2 caregivers to someone living with mental illness based on their stories or their journeys of caregiving. And one is a volunteer who has been trained by us, and the other is receiving the care, and they provide a one-on-one caring relationship or peer support. And then we have 2 in-person programs weekly, and one is on the east side of Cleveland and one is on the west side of Cleveland. We meet on Tuesday nights at Laurel School in Shaker Heights. We start our evening at 6 o'clock with breathing meditation, and then we move into 7 o'clock support group. And on Wednesday nights, we meet at Urban Community School. And right now have only support groups, but in just a few weeks, we've hired our breathing meditation facilitator, and it'll be the same exact schedule, 6 o'clock breathing meditation, followed by 7 o'clock support groups. So that's where we are, and they can sign up for those programs or to get more information right there on our website.
Well, and I certainly hope our listeners will do that. I will add one more thing, that if anybody has an Apple Watch or some sort of like Fitbit, if there is a breathing app on it, or even get it for your phone, I find that taking that 1 minute out of my day a couple of times a day just to take some deep breaths can certainly, help us clear our minds. Is it going to save all of us? Absolutely not. But most of us don't take the time to breathe. And I love the fact that, you are offering this with your support group, because we think it's sort of funny. I'm breathing all the time. Yeah, you're breathing, but you're not taking a cleansing breath. You're not letting things go. You're letting those inner voices just keep nagging at you. And, I'll never stop that inner voice that I have, but I can learn to calm it down a little bit. And sometimes I even answer it and say, well, why do you think I'm so stupid? And, and my husband has found me sitting at my desk here in the studio laughing, and he'll go, "Are you okay?" And I'll go, "Yeah, I was just asking myself why I thought I was so stupid." And he goes, "I didn't hear anybody say that." And I said, "Yeah, you're not my inner voice." But we do think those things. And if we think them, we assume that everybody else around us is thinking those things too. So you're not alone. And courage to caregivers. I'm sorry that you had to start it in the method that you did, but I'm so glad that you started it for yourself and for the rest of us.
Wow. Thank you. I really appreciate the opportunity to talk with you and your listeners today, and any chance we can to really spread the word about mental health. Yes. And, of course, May is Mental Health Month, so this is perfect timing. I think that we all should be talking about this more, and the more we talk about it, I hope that the better it will become for us as a society and a culture. And so thank you for this opportunity, and thank you for all the good caregiving that you provide in your work.
Well, we appreciate you very much, and hopefully we'll be able to meet in person here in the very near future. Okay?
Look forward to it. Thanks,
Thank
Karen.
you. Talk to you soon. Bye-bye now.
Take care.